In this video, I am going to show you step by step how to can tomatoes, and I'm going to be canning crushed tomatoes with no added liquid. I would be following the USDA recommended guidelines, and I will show you each step along the way, and if you're a beginner, you will be able to can your own tomatoes after watching this video. So first I want to go over the things you will need to can your tomatoes. Of course, you're going to need some canning tomatoes, and you're going to need some jars. And here I have some pints and some quarts. I'm going to do two batches. I'm going to do one with quarts and one with pints. And you're going to need a funnel to help you get everything into the jar. I'm going to be pressure canning these, so I don't have to actually boil the jars to sanitize them. However, I did wash them in hot soapy water and clean them very good, and actually ran some of them through the dishwasher. Of course, you're going to need your rings that go on top, and you're going to need your lids, which I have here in a little pot. You are going to need a station set up. I don't have a traditional canning kitchen, so I just have to improvise and do the best I can. But what we're going to do is we're going to wash the tomatoes. So I'm going to put the tomatoes in the sink, which I've also sanitized. I'm going to wash them. Then we will put the tomatoes into boiling water for about 30 to 60 seconds. Then take them out and put them in this bowl. And we're going to take the skin off of them. And then we're going to put them in this large pot and boil them before we put them into our jars. Then once we put them into our jars, add our rings and lids, putting them into our pressure canner. You're going to want to have some lemon juice handy, and for my canner I need some olive oil to oil the rim. This is an All-American canner. It's a metal to metal seal, and you have to oil the rim with olive oil. And of course, I always have my USDA complete guide to home canning handy so that I can make sure I'm following the steps precisely, even though I've done it many times. I want to make sure you can see how I do that. So you just take your tomato, you can see this, and take a sharp knife and you make an X on the bottom. And you do that before you put them into the water to scald them. And this causes the skin to be able to come off easily, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a moment. Now I use this spoon. I'm not sure what kind of spoon it's called, but it's just kind of a little wire mesh to put my tomatoes down into the boiling water, because you don't want to get burned. And we're going to let those go for about 30 to 60 seconds, and you will know when the skin is ready to peel off. I'll show you that when it gets to that point. Meanwhile, I am going to put some more in to wash. Try to show you what the tomatoes look like here in the water. See how this one has cracked and split? See if I can get another one up here. This one has also cracked and split. That's a sign that they are ready to come out. So that one, the skin is already starting to come off of that one. So let's go ahead and put it over here in our bowl. And this one, see? And you can see how it's already kind of puckered up, but that skin will slide right off. Okay, I'm sorry about the shadow. I just wanted to show you what the USDA book says about canning tomatoes, and it explains the procedure. It says to wash the tomatoes and dip in boiling water 30 to 60 seconds or until skins split. Then dip in cold water, slip off skins and remove cores, trim off any bruised or discolored portions, and quarter. Heat 1/6 of the quarters quickly in a large pot, crushing them with a wooden mallet or spoon. As they are added to the pot, this will exude the juice. Continue heating the tomatoes, stirring to prevent burning. Once the tomatoes are boiling, gradually add the remaining quartered tomatoes, stirring constantly. These remaining tomatoes do not need to be crushed. They will soften with heating and stirring. Continue until tomatoes are added. Then boil gently for 5 minutes. Add bottled lemon juice or citric acid to jars. Add 1 teaspoon of salt per quart to jars if desired. Fill hot jars immediately with hot tomatoes, leaving ½ inch. That's not a 1 inch, that's ½ inch headspace. Remove air bubbles and adjust headspace if needed. Wipe rims of jars with a damp, clean paper towel. Adjust lids and process. Acidification is still required for the pressure canning options. Follow all steps in the procedures above for any of the processing options. So over here on the next page, we have the table that tells us how long we need to process the tomatoes. Now I'm going to be pressure canning my tomatoes, and I'm going to follow the directions for crushed tomatoes in a dial gauge pressure canner. This chart is rather difficult to read, so I wanted to show you how to read this chart in case you find it difficult as well. So it tells us here jar size, pints or quarts, and since it's written here pints or quarts, that means whether you're doing a pint or a quart, the processing time is the same. See up here on the water bath canning, pints is different from quarts. It's on its own line. But here under pressure canning, it's the same, pints or quarts. And here is the process time for pints and quarts. And it has 20 minutes and then it has 15 minutes. This is what I found confusing, because over here is your elevation. Now, I fall under the 0 to 2,000 feet elevation. And so if I use a 6-pound weight, then I would process for 20 minutes, whether I had pints or quarts. And if I use 11 pounds, I process for 15 minutes. And then you have to increase the weight as your elevation increases. So I also wanted to show you here that it does give you an idea of quantity. It says an average of 22 pounds is needed per canner load of 7 quarts. Now my canners are small. My canner holds 4 quarts. And I think it holds 5 pints. An average of 14 fresh pounds is needed per canner load of 9 pints. A bushel weighs 53 pounds and yields 17 to 20 quarts of crushed tomatoes, an average of 2 3/4 pounds per quart. So we need 2 tablespoons of lemon juice per quart of tomatoes. And you can go ahead and add that to your jars before you fill them. And only 1 tablespoon for each pint. So now that we have our tomatoes scalded, the next process is to remove the skin and the core. Now the book says to put them in cold water to cool them off, but that's so you don't burn yourself. What I found is if I put on these little gloves, these just little latex gloves, it gives me thick enough skin on my hands so that I can handle the tomatoes and not get burned. The important thing is that you don't burn yourself. The easiest way to get the skin off your potatoes is to take the core out first. And I have this little tool here. I'm not sure what it's called. I don't know if it's made for tomatoes or strawberries, but I use it on both. But it just has a little, it's round, it has teeth on it, and so I take it and I go around the core of the tomato with it, and it just pops right out, and then the tomato skin will just peel right off where we scalded them. So easy. So you just go around the core, pop it out, and then take the skin right off. So when you get about 1/6 of your tomatoes skinned, the instructions say to quarter them. So that means to cut them in 4 pieces, half and then half again, and put them into your pot. And then we're just going to mash them up a little bit with our big wooden spoon. And what this does is it just creates enough juice, releases enough juice from the tomatoes so you'll have enough juice in the tomatoes to can your tomatoes. Because we're not going to be adding any water or any tomato juice to these. They're going to make their own juice. If you are enjoying this video, I would like to encourage you to like and subscribe to this channel. I do lots of canning and preserving and bread making videos, along with a few little videos about the farm and the homestead. And check out my links. I have a web page with all the my favorite things, Amazon links to them. I am an Amazon associate. I do earn a small commission from that. It does not affect the price you pay in any way. We're going to take our big wooden spoon and we're just going to mash up some of the tomatoes. We have all of our tomatoes in our pot. I just wanted to show you what it looked like here. And we need to bring this to a boil and boil it for 5 minutes. It says to bring our tomatoes to a gentle boil, and you can see they are boiling. Hopefully you can see that they're boiling gently. And we are going to set a timer for 5 minutes. Our 5-minute timer has finished, so we are now ready to jar our tomatoes. So I have 2 ladles here. I have one with holes. Hopefully you can see the holes. And then I have one without holes. And so I'm going to use the one with holes to make sure each jar actually gets some tomatoes and not just juice. So I'll put one scoop with the tomatoes. And put a little more. It is messy, that's why I have these towels down. We already have our lemon juice in our jars. So now I'm going to switch over to this ladle. And remember, we want a 1/2 inch headspace. So that's halfway up the part of the lid that actually has the grooves on it. We have all of our jars filled. Now we need to check to see if there are any air bubbles, and you can use any kind of a plastic long handle. They do make, I have one here somewhere, but you just don't want to use metal because you don't want to scratch your jar. It's not probably going to hurt it unless you hit it really hard. But to be safe, just use plastic, and you just poke it down in the jar and kind of move the tomatoes around to make sure there's no air bubbles. And usually once you do this, you need to add a little bit of juice to most of the jars. So get you some, and remember, we want 1/2 inch headspace. That one's pretty close. And now we are going to take a wet paper towel and clean the top of our jars. And I just want to let you know that meanwhile, while my tomatoes were boiling, I put my lids in some hot water and brought it to a boil. That is not required, but it is something that I do because I have found I have a much better seal rate with my lids if I do that. Because and I don't know if it's because of the times we live in or what, but sometimes the lids you get might not be as fresh as they could be, and I guess that rubber maybe gets a little hard. You want to make sure there is nothing at all on the top of these rims, because that will stop your jar from sealing correctly. So make sure you clean them off really good. And this is a rather messy process, so that's why I just put down towels. Now, because my lids are hot, I use this little lifter. It's just a little stick with a magnet on the end of it to help me get my lids out of the water. Now we want to put our rings on finger tight. So just as soon as you start to feel resistance, you're done. So I need 2 to 3 inches of water in this All-American canner, and I have hot water here because our jars are hot, and I'm going to go ahead and pour that in till I get 2 to 3 inches. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this on and set my jars into the canner. You're going to need a jar lifter. That's what this looks like. And it works really well. So I have here some olive oil, and I'm going to put it on a paper towel, and I'm going to lightly oil where these 2 metal pieces meet, the one on the pot and the one on the lid. You don't want to use anything except olive oil or possibly Vaseline. You can use Vaseline or olive oil because not all oils are the same, and some will get kind of gummy if you're not careful, and you just want to make sure you oil that really good so that you'll be able to get your lid off when the time comes. And so on the All-American canner, you add up these 2 arrows. There's an arrow on the lid and there's an arrow on the pot, and you line those up and then you twist it. You want to get your lid as level as possible. There's a little piece here that goes up under there. So once you get everything lined up, you begin tightening your handles, and you want to do the a handle on this side and this side, tighten at the same time, and don't tighten it all the way down until you get them all slightly tightened, and then we'll come back and tighten them back. So now I can come back and give them all another twist. And now we are going to let this come up to steam, and we will vent. When steam starts coming out the vent here, we will vent for 10 minutes, and then we'll put our weight on. So my Carey electric can, it calls for 4 cups of water, and so I'm going to put that in there. 4 cups of water. It has a little measuring guide over here. And you want to make sure you have your rack in the bottom of your canner. I have a rack in the bottom of my American canner too. So make sure your rack is in there and you have the correct amount of water in your canner. So now I'm just going to load the canner with my jars. So once we get all of our jars in our canner, I'm going to make sure my weight is set to exhaust. I'm going to press high, and I'm going to set my timer for 15 minutes and hit start. And this canner will let me know when it's time to close the vent. Now, I just noticed, I don't know if you can see it or not, but I just noticed that steam just now started coming out of my All-American canner. So I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes, and then I will put the weight on my All-American canner. 10 minutes since our vent has been venting, and we want to take our weight here. Notice it has a 5, a 10, and a 15. We want to turn it to the 15 and just set it down on top of our vent. And now we are going to watch the pressure gauge. We need at least 11 pounds of pressure. So when that gets to 11 pounds of pressure, we can begin our timer, and I'll need to regulate my temperature of my stove to make sure it doesn't get too much higher than 11. And my Carey beeped, and I closed my exhaust, and now it is building pressure. And once it comes to pressure, it will automatically count down 15 minutes. The countdown has begun on the electric canner, and we are almost to pressure on the All-American. So we are at 11 pounds of pressure. I'm going to go ahead and set a timer, 15 minutes. I'm also going to turn my heat down just a little more. You have to keep a closer eye on your manual canners to make sure you're staying at the correct pressure and not dropping below the recommended pressure. So if I was to turn the heat down too far and drop below 11 pounds of pressure, I would have to restart my timer. The timer has finished, so our 15 minutes is up. I'm going to turn the heat off. And now we just let this cool down naturally. We don't do anything. We wait until all the pressure is gone and this registers back at 0. So all the pressure is gone. I can move this and no steam comes out. So we can open our canner. And take out our jars. They look really good. You notice there's some separation, but that's perfectly normal. Sometimes when they cool off, the tomatoes will sink back down. They don't always stay that way. Finally, all the pressure is gone from the All-American canner. So I'm going to remove the weight. And then I'm going to loosen I'm not sure what these are called, all of the bolts. Okay, and then I'm going to turn the lid. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave the lid set like that for just a couple of minutes to let some of the heat out slowly. This helps prevent with siphoning. We're going to remove the lid, remove our jars. So I just wanted to show you guys the tomatoes, how some of them, you notice when I took them out of the canner, some of them had separated, and hopefully you can see there's clearer liquid here on the bottom and some tomatoes sticking out here on the top. And you can gently turn your tomatoes over like this, and it will help them to settle. Usually they will settle over time. As you can see, this jar has already settled and there's no separation of the liquid. But if you want to just gently toss them around in the jar, don't shake them vigorously or anything, that will help them to recombine into the liquid. Usually over time they'll fall back down into the liquid. Since our jars have been sitting for 24 hours, they are completely cooled, and we can now safely remove the rings. And I know there are a lot of discussions out there. Should I leave the rings on? Should I remove the rings? I would really encourage you to remove the rings for 2 reasons. Number one, you need to wash the jar where the ring was, because most of the time you're going to have some siphoning, which means liquid in the jar came out during the canning. And so if you feel that, you can feel it's a little sticky where the tomato juice came out, and you want to wash that off. And you have to take the ring off to do that anyway, and you'll have to wash these rings. And number 2 is, if you leave this ring on, it could do 2 things actually. One, if you leave it on like really tight, you could have what's called a false seal. In other words, this jar could have come unsealed, but I wouldn't know it because the ring was holding the lid down. Where if you take your rings off, you know that that lid is secure and it has not come unsealed. And also, if you leave the ring on, sometimes it is near impossible to get off, because if there has been any siphoning and the stickiness around the rim, it just rusts or adheres itself to the jar, and you can have a very, very difficult time getting this ring off months later when you go to use your canned goods. So, and it serves no purpose on the jar after the sealing has taken place and the jar is cooled. It serves no purpose. So I am going to remove all the rings from my jars, and I'm going to wash them off, and I am going to write on the lids what is in these jars, and then I will store them in my pantry. To wash off your jars, all you need is some hot soapy water and a dishcloth, and just take each jar and wipe around the rim and the top, and if there's anything on the sides of the jar, you can wipe that off too. Just wipe it around where those grooves are on the rim of the jar to get off anything that may be there from any siphoning that might have taken place. And just wipe each jar, and then we're going to dry the jars off. If you don't do this and there is anything on the rim of that jar and you store it away, it could grow mold or other unpleasant things on the outside of your jar, which doesn't mean the food is bad, but it's very unappetizing if you go to get a jar and it has mold on the outside of it. Now, after you've washed your jars off, you want to dry the top. Dry the jar off, especially the top and that metal lid, because we don't want it to rust, and we're going to write on it. After you have your jars washed and dried, you want to get yourself a marker. Now, some people get really fancy and they use labels that you can stick on the lids of the jars. Whatever makes you happy, go for it. But I have found that just writing on it with a magic marker, a permanent marker, and you just want to take your jars and you want to write what is on it, on the top. And so on these, I'm going to write tomatoes. Now, I could go further and write crushed tomatoes, but I'm just going to write tomatoes. I'm going to put the month and the year. And that's what I'm going to write on the top of my jars. So this way, I know what's in them, and I know when they were canned. And you might think, I don't need to write on the top of my jar because I know what's in this jar. But if you do a lot of canning, trust me, there will come a day when you pick up a jar of something and you're like, I just don't know what this is, and I don't remember canning it. And so it would help if you had it written on top what it is. It helps you to use the oldest first. And if you're sending someone else to the pantry, it helps them to know what's in the jar, because maybe they don't know what canned tomatoes look like or whatever. So that concludes our video for today, and I hope you learned how to can crushed tomatoes with their own juice, no added juice, following the USDA guidelines. And I hope you will leave me a comment below. Let me know you enjoyed this video. God bless. Bye-bye.